Welcome back, it's me, Lou. Alright, so today's video is going to be a special toy haul video. We're going to take a look at some recent acquisitions that I purchased over the last few months. This toy haul is going to be G.I. Joe themed, if you haven't noticed. So here are three recent G.I. Joe purchases. First, let's start with this guy on the left. So I was really excited to get this. This is the 25th anniversary G.I. Joe Commando, codenamed Snake Eyes. So I got this recently at one of my favorite local collectible toy stores, Wax Packs Records and Toys, located in beautiful Roselle, Illinois. If you happen to be in the Chicagoland area, check it out. So a little bit ago, there was a collector who sold some of his 25th anniversary action figures to the store. And this one, I knew I had to pull the trigger on. This is a figure I have loose in my collection, but I really just wanted one mint on card. A few years ago, maybe 2 years ago, Hasbro started re-releasing, the smaller Joes again. On the vintage style card back at Walmart, and they have the elongated bubbles with more accessories, but for me this is something I really wanted. I remember back in 2007 when the 25th anniversary line came out. It was met with a lot of anticipation and excitement from the fans, myself included. It was great to finally get our beloved classic characters, but with like completely new sculpts and re-engineered bodies, that kind of reflected the technology at the time. There was greater range of motion, more articulation, much more better proportions that provided for a better realistic looking action figure. And I just love this design also. It's a throwback to the old card backs of the 80s, with the big explosion and then the character illustration. But with it being the 25th anniversary, much of the card is highlighted in silver. Like the G.I. Joe logo is in silver, one of the stripes, and there's like silver trim around the perimeter of the card. It's a really standout looking nice piece. And one of the reasons why I pulled the trigger on this figure also is because, for one, it's Snake Eyes. He's, one of the, if not the most iconic of the modern G.I. Joe characters from A Real American Hero. And I don't know, there's just something about this line that I'm very, very nostalgic for. It's cool also when you look on the card back. For the 25th anniversary, there's it compiles all the figures available at this time to celebrate the 25th anniversary. And it's a nice lineup. I don't remember the exact order or how many waves it took to for this set to actually come out. But it was just kind of impressive that right out of the gate, these were the characters they were going to spotlight in the 25th anniversary. There were also additional box sets, but the solo carded figures are great. You have Snake Eyes, Flint, Cobra Commander. It's just awesome. And then you get the file card here. It's not as bio heavy as like some of the cards that we got in the 80s, but it's a lot more information on the character than you get like on, when compared to like a G.I. Joe Classified series figure. You don't really get anything there. So yeah, this is a nice piece. I like this a lot. The card isn't perfect. As you can see, it's a little bit worn towards the top, but I don't mind. I don't plan on collecting, an entire set of like the 25th anniversary on card back. If I happen to run into them, like at a flea market or a toy convention or a comic book convention, and if the price is fair, I wouldn't mind, adding a couple more pieces, especially if it's a character I'm very fond of. Like, for me, there's of course the pairing. I need the Storm Shadow figure now just to pair them together, but just to have Snake Eyes by himself is pretty cool. And speaking of Storm Shadow, we come to this. I purchased this at TFCon Chicago. TFCon is a Transformers-centric convention. It was held in Chicago a few months ago. I got this for a steal of a price. I think I only got it for like $9 or $10. And the Pursuit of Cobra line actually goes for a lot on the secondary market. I like this version of Storm Shadow just because his head, he kind of has this like plated armor on his forehead, and it almost looks like the design is influenced heavily by the video game Ninja Gaiden, and the character, I think it's what's his name again, Ryu Hayabusa. If you're familiar with Ninja Gaiden, it was a video game that graced the original NES back in the 8-bit days. It was produced by Tecmo. Later on, the game saw a resurrection with a much more modern take on the action genre, I think with the PlayStation 2, and then the game might have been remastered on PS3, I think, if I remember correctly. The Ninja Gaiden game, it's one of those games that really, really tortures you because it's very difficult. But I just love this. You know, the helm here, it clearly like identifies with that Tecmo Ninja Gaiden character. The Pursuit of Cobra, you got lots and lots of accessories, as you can see here. You have a hook, a rope, giant bladed, I think it's called a halberd, 2 katanas, the short blade, the longer blade. You kind of have these Wolverine-inspired, like, claws. And the uniform looks great. You know, and he kind of has, like, this samurai armor with the Arashikage logo on the chest piece. And then on the skirt, he has the Cobra logo. Wonderful illustration, too. The artwork for the Pursuit of Cobra line is beautiful. You know, it looked awesome. I love this line so much. I've said this many times. I think Pursuit of Cobra is probably my favorite G.I. Joe line. And this guy even had a action feature with his whirlwind kick. You wind up the figure and then you push the button and it kind of spins around. And here's his file card. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful figure. This came out back in, is there a date? I'm not sure if this thing's dated. 2010. So you're looking at a figure that's 12 years old. Yeah, I love this line so much. It was such a cool time. And then next we come to this. This is from 2001. This was when Hasbro kind of like tried to, I don't want to say tried because I think they were successful with it. This is when they kind of like reintroduced G.I. Joe, a real American hero, back into like the mainstream. During the, I think, mid to late 90s, G.I. Joe kind of like, it still had a very slight presence. Some of you might remember G.I. Joe Extreme, which was, I think, during the mid-90s. I think that was kind of like Hasbro's last attempt at trying to, like, resuscitate, you know, the G.I. Joe brand. But G.I. Joe Extreme, you know, it only lasted, I think, maybe at the most 2 or 3 years, if I remember correctly. It even had an animated cartoon, comic books. But during this time period, you know, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero in 2001, this was Hasbro, you know, them really trying to, like, reintroduce G.I. Joe back into the mainstream. Devil's Due published a line of comic books that kind of, like, supplemented this line of toys. And for me, it was very exciting, you know, for G.I. Joe to be back. And I mean, it didn't bother me at all, but these new engineered bodies, did away with the classic O-rings, which were kind of like those rubber bands that held the figures together. Older fans, I think, for the most part, were against that. And at some point in time, they did revert back to the O-ring design. But I really wanted this set when I saw it. I got it for a very reasonable price. It's a little sun damaged, the card back, but I don't mind. This belonged to the first wave of figures. And they were like released. They weren't doing solo releases. They were doing 2-packs. So this was Duke vs. Cobra Commander. There was a Snake Eyes vs. Storm Shadow. But for me to get the 2 iconic leaders, you know, mint on card really meant a lot to me. And it's just awesome. And then here's some of the other figures that were available. And it's kind of interesting because they used like comic book style artwork. So you got Duke and Cobra Commander. You got Gung Ho versus Destro. You got Wetsuit versus the Moray, Snake Eyes versus Storm Shadow, Heavy Duty versus the Claws, and then Frostbite and the Neo Vipers. So these were kind of paired up. So this was a 2-pack. This was a 2-pack. Yeah, this was awesome. And real quick, here's an example of the figures. So this is the Cobra Commander that came with this 2-pack. And like I stated earlier, they did away with the O-ring. So this figure's articulation, it was kind of in line with what, many action figures were doing. Had to swivel at the waist and then the simple articulation at the hips. So they kind of did away with the rubber bands on the inside. But then sometime later, they kind of changed gears, and then they went back to the rubber band design, which I was opposed to. I didn't like it. And then they re-released the Cobra Commander figure again. As you can see, it looks like almost the same figure, but it's actually a different torso piece and bottom piece. If you look at the crotch area, this is much more reminiscent of the 80s figure. And then they went back to the rubber band design. And the reason why I don't like the rubber bands is because they deteriorate. And then you get this, the rubber bands start to dry rot. And then they kind of lose their, their spring and their rigidity. And they become a little bit more fragile. So I know that there were a lot of older collectors that were more nostalgic for the older design, but for me, I preferred this. It would last longer. It's not going to have the same range of motion as this does, but at the same time, this has a longer lifespan, in my opinion. So you can see the differences in the bodies, especially around the waist, the giant belt buckle here. This kind of has the socketed torso and the rounded off bottom, whereas this one is just swivels. And then here's an example of the Duke body. This is actually a custom. I just kind of like, because they eventually re-released this guy here, but like in desert fatigues with the brown and the tans. But I kind of wanted to do a custom, so I swapped out the bottoms. And it's easy too because, much like the older Joes, you just took a screwdriver and just took them apart. But the articulation was, back then, I'm not sure if this was considered a lot, but this is what we had to deal with in 2001 with G.I. Joe. Which I didn't mind. I thought it was pretty good. Oh, I also have this. Let me grab it real quick. This is a repaint of the Cobra Commander, but in black and gold and red, which I love. I love this color scheme so much more than the standard blue Cobra Commander. For me, the Cobra Army, when they're in black, red, and gold, it looks more regal. It looks more authoritative. It's just awesome. I think it makes for a much more cooler presentation. But you can see here, pretty much the same figure. But I do think when they re-released this figure, I think they kind of closed the gap between his legs because it's not as wide. Like his feet here are kind of spaced pretty far apart, but on the re-release, it looks like they brought the legs in a little bit closer. Alright, so yeah, this is some of my recent G.I. Joe purchases over the last few months. I'm not actively hunting these older Joes down, but when I come across them in the wild, I'm not shy about pulling the trigger on them if the price is fair and reasonable. Each one of these figures represents an era of G.I. Joe collecting that I was very either like fond of or just kind of like really knee deep into it. I have such fond memories of the 25th anniversary. I loved the Pursuit of Cobra line. And of course, when they brought back G.I. Joe, I was one of those fans. I was just really excited to have, our classic characters back, but like with updated, engineered bodies. So, good stuff all around. If you're an older fan, much like myself, and if you have any favorite Joe lines, throughout the years, or if you actually had any of these figures, I'd love for you to share your stories in the comments down below. For me, it's always nice to hear other people's stories about, these specific lines of figures. Like I know Classified series is like the new hotness, but for me, my bread and butter, I think, is always going to be the smaller Joe figures. All right, so with that being said, let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So, until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.